So we'll begin the December 10th Finance Subcommittee meeting. And we start by taking attendance. We have to take formal roll call, right, in meetings? No? Okay. So I think the first...
Robin's doing that for you, Mariah.
She's doing it for me. Okay, great. So the first thing on the agenda is to vote the minutes from the November 12th meeting. Does someone want to make a motion for that? Thank you, Susan. Second? Thank you, David. And any discussion or any corrections or anything like that? Nope. Okay. Susan?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
I'll vote yes. Thank you. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the FY21 budget and town school partnership updates. Mary Ellen, is that you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. There's nothing new yet from the town around the town school partnership meeting or update. I gave the presentation of the memo. Sorry, I'm trying to on the we're working on documenting documenting 1.1 million of the town cares funds for the RLA staff. That will be, I need to have that completed by tomorrow for Justin to vet and make sure that that is being, we can charge off 1.1 million of that. That will significantly help with our projected deficit and bring that down to about $500,000. We are anticipating some savings in transportation. I'll have once I get through the CARES funds and the RLA and getting those all posted, we'll get the transportation savings applied to the January FY21 update. So you'll see that. That should be in the $100,000 to $200,000 range due to the fact that we didn't have 10 days of transportation in September. And that will help reduce our budget. I was on a call today, new news call today. We're chasing down 2 other sources of funds. One is there is going to be additional funding to offset food service in the food service program for COVID-19 expenses. So for the first year in 5 years, food service is actually going to be financially stable. So yay. So they've got some work to do to claim those funds. Those are all things that have to be spent as of December 30th. But the fun wrinkle in it is that they are allowing us to go back to March 1st, which is the first time any of the funds we've been able to go back into another fiscal year. So Sasha Palmer and Tess Washburn have a little bit of work to do, but so those funds will either flow to free cash, or which wouldn't be a bad thing for 23. Or they'll be able to help with offsetting either town budget or our budget, depending on the timing of how we get all this done. So
how much did we transfer at the beginning of this year? Retroactive? Did we have to do any of that? Okay.
No, we didn't know. We ended up squeaking in balanced really closely, but so that's new news as of today on food service. So I think we need to prepare food service for the spring because we don't know what the offsets are going to be for the spring. So the idea is to leave a balance, leave a healthy balance at this point there, or swap out. Anyway, well, it's a lot of journal entries and a lot of accounting muck in December. So that is so that's sort of new news from the school committee meeting on the 21 update. So again, the beginning of January, or the first meeting in January, I will try to have a January update, which will reflect some of this change and stuff that's happening in December.
Helen?
Thank you. Can you hear me, first of all? I'm using, yeah.
Yep.
I'm using new earbuds. I don't know how they work. The question I have is, you said there were 10 days of bus savings, but it seems to me there's probably more savings in busing. Is that correct?
There could be.
Because, I mean, are we running the same amount of Metco buses with the amount of students who are in RLA, and are we running some of the other buses that?
Yes, we are actually still running this number of buses. We're trying to charge, get the cleaning costs split out. So we have some, I know for our special education vehicles, we asked the vendor to split out the cleaning costs, the disinfecting costs that they're passing on to us from the beginning of the school year to December. So we've passed that off to the town cares funds or the CVRF funds, whichever one fits. And then we're running, so the savings really is coming into special ed. We're running fewer special ed vehicles actually, because some are at home. And that seems to be where our bigger savings are, is not in our school buses, but actually in our special ed section. So that, I've asked Matt and Evan to put a report together, so I'm having that report finalized, and that will be attached to the January report, just like Mike D'Onofrio does one for tuitions.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
So is this the whole 21 budget update, or is there more?
That's it for now. And then because I need to do, included in the report or attached to it was the, non-operating budget funds, the COVID funds. So we're still reconciling those. So January, I know that report and our filings are due in January. So we'll probably do a end of January report on where we landed with those funds, because we'll have finished all the journal entries and everything and identified all the expenses. So that will be up, that section in that report will be updated at the end of January.
Okay. I mean, I think one thing that's important just for the minutes to reflect is that we're all very interested in maximizing all of the possible funds we can, charge against CARES. So I think, I assume that between the town and the schools that we're gonna over-identify past our allocation, just in case something gets rejected at the last minute or whatever. But can you just, I think there's general agreement that our goal is to maximize our reimbursements, but and there was some concern that maybe we wouldn't be able to use all the money. So I just want to confirm that.
Yeah, well, I got a report. I was able to get a rough report out of Munis yesterday that I've been working on cleaning up to capture a little bit more. So that payroll hit $1 million. So once I saw a report that I knew wasn't complete and inclusive of everything hit $1 million, so my stress level dropped dramatically. I also, soon after that, called and told Melissa and Justin is that you're going to get from me more than $1.1 million. And I told them, I said, I know you only gave us $1.1 million, but every dollar counts. And if you need some more dollars, then I'm going to give you documentation so that, we have so little time to get this turned around that I'm going to give you, since I have to run this report anyway, and it's all on the report. And if the report shows up as $1.4 million and you can use $1.15 million of that, great. How you file for the town cares, and as long as you're using all those funds, because we're going to have it somewhere. And frankly, if we can return money back to the town, that would be great too.
Right. Yeah. No, I just wanted to make sure, and maybe it's 400,000 is sort of the most we can. I think just understanding, and not us, but just us having confidence that you, just let me say it out loud, that you and Dustin are having the conversation of making sure that somewhere in the town, but ideally the school, that we will have enough receipts to not have to give back any of that money.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're on that page, and
okay. Okay, great. Yes, I just the only reason I wanted to sort of get that into the record is that we've been asked that question so many different ways. we don't have enough money, we don't have enough things to build to it, what's getting billed to it, it just keeps coming up. So it'd be good to, okay, great, thank you.
Yeah,
I think
and
the other piece of that,
I don't have any information on what the town is using their 2.3 of the 5, their portion of it. I don't have any information on that. The memo attached to the December memo shows that we ended up with 2.9. So we're going to maximize every penny of that and some for them.
okay, good.
Can I ask a,
sort of
oh,
sorted
sorry.
question? So, no, please. I was just going to ask the corollary question is, what does that mean for the reserve fund transfer that we had identified that we may or may not need going forward? Looking backwards, because I think there's a looking forward piece. I have like a bunch of questions about the rest of FY21, but just looking backwards about reserve fund transfer.
So once I do the January update and I've incorporated the transportation savings and landed confidently what that number is, and what we still have to hold in reserve for special education, then my intention for that January update was to make a recommendation around that reserve fund transfer, either to reduce it or to release it. And if it's a reduce it to what amount makes sense.
Okay.
So that's the plan for January.
So we'll have a second quarter report.
You'll probably have a January update and then a full quarter report at the end of the month.
Okay, because we never got a first quarter report.
Yeah, no,
right?
I did do one. I'm not sure it got, I think I was doing so many reports, it got mixed in with like the report. So I can't quite do a full-blown quarterly report for the first part of January because I'm really focused on the CARES funds and identifying those. And making sure those pull off. So really the end of January, beginning of February, I should really have a really full second quarter report. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to pull off a second quarter in early January, but by the end of the month, it should flow out. I should be set to be able to do it at the end of the month.
Can I ask
Okay,
what I think is a corollary to Susan's question, or maybe just Susan's question asked a different way, which is, if more than the 1.1 goes to CARES, does that correspondingly reduce the operating deficit in which we find ourselves?
Yeah, so the cover of the memo that I sent shows that we would be down to about $500,000 in deficit projected. And then the new information that we're dealing with is transportation. So how much will transportation reduce that 500 down? And do we have any other unknown or known, unknown, I should say, because we should know savings at this point, but if we do have any other unknown savings or unanticipated savings, or do we have any other unknown expenditures that I wasn't including?
But if in the say Justin can absorb 1.2 into the CARES money, would that also, like, would that extra 100,000 reduce the deficit? It would. Okay.
Yes. Oh yeah, dollar for dollar.
Okay, I just wasn't sure if it was coming from some other place.
No, dollar for dollar would reduce it.
Okay. Can I ask another question about the memo? And maybe we had seen this at the previous school committee meeting, but I missed it, was that the budget freeze that's talked about in the memo. And I don't think we talked about that last week at school committee, but do you mind just spending a couple minutes talking about what that means? I feel like it seems like a weird year to be freezing the budget. Like materials and people in the middle of like what feels like an unending cascade of new materials and people. So how does that work? What does that mean in this context?
All right, so in the beginning of November, we started talking about a budget freeze, and we were talking with our budget managers, principals, primarily the middle of November, that this was coming. So what we did is we put a freeze on expenditures, but we basically gave them, we gave the secretaries from November 18th to encumber or at least requisition by vendor or even loosely to the public schools of Brookline money that they knew they had orders they had orders that they needed to execute, but didn't have the quotes, hadn't quite finished the process, hadn't started the process, but they knew I need to spend 5,000 for this, whatever this is. So we allowed them to requisition funds that would not be converted to an immediate order. So what that did is it allowed them to, because some of them have springtime orders that they make, and we really don't want to issue the purchase order now, or they don't know how many they need, but they know how much they're going to have to spend. So we had them requisition that to hold those funds. And I explained to them, but that by doing this process and them requisitioning it and not converting it to a purchase order, when I run the financial reports, it shows up to me as an encumbrance, the way I run my reports. So I know that there is intention for use of those funds. And for the most part, they did that. We have quite a bit that's sitting in open requisitions that will eventually get converted through the year for supplies, materials, software license renewals in the spring that have to happen, things like that. What I'm actually hoping is that once we get to once we get through the CARES Act transfer out and that finished in January, is that as funds are identified, I can sort of release money into their, sort of do another wave of releasing money into their hands for things that they forgot about. One of the things we did last spring as part of the freeze process is if they had something that was unanticipated or unknown that, came up, we would run that through senior staff and make a decision about whether we really needed it, didn't need it. And for the most part, we were able to, squeeze, $1,000 here, $500 there. We were able to, some small dollar amounts we can squeeze out of the budget, and on kind of an urgency basis, and we'll continue to do that review. So there's nothing, and more than likely, I will attempt, as part of my projections, is assuming they're spending 100% of their budget, even though I have a freeze, to see if that, if I can release more money into their supplies and materials budgets. But a lot of them encumbered quite a bit of their budgets. Most of the budgets were about 50 to 60% expended already, which is normal for this time of year. I mean, really, December, they really should be 70% expended. They should have purchased most of their supplies for the year by now anyway. So we'll handle anything that is kind of an emergency or forgotten about. We'll handle those on a case-by-case basis. And
staffing, is the staffing, I mean, at this point, things are relatively stable. It is
things
what it
that
is.
It should be what it is. Are there people that come and go? People that come, like if you're replacing a position, the question will be, do you need to replace the position? A grade level classroom teacher, yes, we need to replace that position. Some of the other positions you don't necessarily need to replace. Some positions take a long time to replace, so we'll allow the replacement because we know we're sitting with savings because the position is vacant until the replacement comes in. So we'll still have that position replaced. And then as you get into the end part of the school year, sometimes it doesn't make sense to replace a position because you're hiring somebody for literally 3 months or 2 months. And they're not, and unless there's a position guaranteed for them in September, some people just, it doesn't make sense to hire and fill those positions. But that's on a case-by-case basis as well.
Okay, so it's a flexible freeze, not a hard freeze. It's got some give.
It's a freeze with conversations, yes.
Okay. Yeah, Susan.
Yeah, it made me think, Mary Ellen, given how many unfilled positions we have, can we, when you do your January report, can we get for the first half an identification of savings or whatever you want to call it because we didn't fill positions?
I'm actually not sure if I'll be able to do that. only because we've had so many positions moving and backfilled, and RLA getting moved over. I will, I will attempt that, because it's a good question. I should have that answer for you, so it's a good question. I would also want to make sure that I have what are the current unfilled positions that we have that never got filled.
That's what I mean. Salaries that were not expended. So a position that was identified but was never filled, there should be 6 months of salary savings on that, even if we filled it January 1st. And we'll need that. I mean, we'll need that count for the FY22 budget anyway, right?
Mhm.
So
I would think that would also help in terms of projecting your year-end.
So, yeah, so position that's unfilled, I should be able to give you positions unfilled. I'm not sure I can give you what you described, which is a vacancy that then gets filled, and that's savings, because that's already baked, that's baked in. The positions unfilled going forward, there's a decision about, do we fill them or not? And do I take those savings and bank those, do I fund those or not fund those?
I understand that it's not going to be a cash savings because you have redeployed the money elsewhere. So I get that. But I think it's important to show people that we have, let's say it's, $200,000-300,000 of salary that did not go out the door because those positions were budgeted but not filled. And we have used that money to plow back into other things, because I think it just shows that we are not spending money to spend money, that where there are savings, we're capturing them and plowing that back in. I totally understand they're not going to be cash savings. But we're going to need those counts anyway, because otherwise it's going to be hard to budget for 22. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right, and I'll make your life even more difficult. I understand we've had a lot of difficulties getting substitutes, and that budget has always run over. So I'm hoping this year it'll at least be flush, or would there be saving? Looking at what we've done to date, what would we project where we will end with that this year?
Okay, I'll add that to the quarter.
Great. I mean, if we've spent a third of what we usually spend, or however much it is.
Most of the substitute budget disappears in April through June. That's really where we go from kind of a steady state to way over budget. Except for last year.
But this year may be different.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
Susan?
Just on that line, sort of 2 other places where we should be finding, or maybe it's an expense, maybe it's I'm not sure what it is. It might be a savings. But when Jim wrote the memo for the additional funds, 1.7 or whatever we asked for from town meeting, some of those were based on full year salaries, I think. Some of them were based on partial year salaries. So I think it would just be helpful to get, when you're giving us a Q2 update, to just give us also an update on where we are with hiring. Like what, we had help desk people, we had all kinds of folks that were identified in that request that was granted. And so I think it's just important for us to understand, because that's an FY21 issue with backfilling Meg, and actually, no, that wasn't the first tranche. That wasn't even in the town meeting tranche, whatever it was. But there were all those pieces.
And one more question that's related to that, but not necessarily. Did we end up ordering all the owls we wanted? The memo said something about 200, right? So,
yep.
And those actually did get ordered?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, they're arriving sometime in the next couple of weeks, and will get deployed in January.
And are they actually getting split half high school, half elementary, or?
100 high school, 100 K8 to the K8s. And Michelle and Feng Yang are working on the PD and deployment plan.
Great. Okay. Any other questions from anybody on Yep, Susan.
Yeah, just to sort of close out the list. So I think people are still waiting for the FY21 budget, like the budget book. So I'm not really sure what to tell them at this point. I mean, typically what we give people, whatever, for the May town meeting preceding is a document that's, I don't know, Mary Ellen, 100 pages long. And
300.
it's got, well, there's the 300-page
Oh,
version.
yeah, the town meeting book is on our website in the budget area. That's there.
But it's all, well, but for FY21?
Yeah.
But it's all wrong. I mean, none of it is updated with anything we're talking about.
Well, I'd
It's not
never
wrong.
have
It
done
was
that.
right-
I've never done that, though. That's true with
Right.
that's true back to Peter Rowe. It never gets updated with anything we've done after town meeting.
Well,
So
but
I
this
guess-
year
And you have the
well, but
quarterly
this-
reports.
Right, but this year we told people that they would be getting a budget in November. So an updated budget in November. We told them, because May was canceled, we did June, and we told them June was our best guess, but that we would be doing a budget presentation in November, which got squeezed down to 5 minutes, but we still need to, I've still gotten questions. I mean, I've actually gotten questions anyway for like, where's the FY21 budget? Where is our baseline FY21 budget that we had said we would update from last May? And it's got like, you know, the positions in it and.
Yeah, I don't know where that or how that's going to get done.
But how are we going to build a baseline what are we building a baseline for 22 on if we don't have?
So first of all, we shouldn't be building a baseline on the 21. This is my opinion. So we're currently working on a baseline budget based on our enrollment, our current enrollment. And so what we're working on, because we have 900 fewer students, we shouldn't be presenting the same budget we've always had because we have different number of students in our schools. And so if we come back, there's now a report of a vaccine. So we're starting with trying to develop a baseline budget of the number of FTEs needed for students in current students in each grade level as a base. And then by subject matter, special ed, EL, all the different pieces and parts that we have, ECS. And the other piece of that same base budget is for lack of a better term right now, pandemic reserve, which would be a reserve budget for FTEs and staffing that we would first attempt to do based on the Cropper-McGivens projection of enrollment for 22, because there's a delta there. I know in a couple of meetings, there's been a question asked about surveying families that have left the district and are they coming back and kind of where people are. So that survey's under development right now and will be going out. I'm not sure exactly when, but it will be. I know it's under development. I saw a draft of it. And so to survey, so we can gauge, are we going to potentially get 450 students back? Are we going to get the 900 students back? Are we going to get the projected enrollment back? We know we're going to get some back, but we don't, the reality is, at least what I have observed, and I don't get to decide this, but I have said we need to keep this as a flexible pool of funds. Because once you dedicate funds to a school, they will absorb it. And if it needs to be moved somewhere else, it's very difficult to move it to a different school. So budget the base level FTEs. What does every school need for the FTEs and for the students we have, student facing budget. Develop a per pupil materials amount for every student grade level. Curriculum coordinators are working on that. What's our base really need to be? And then what does our reserve need to be? And so when those students begin to come back and impact section counts and in the number of sections in a building, then we can respond accordingly and have resources available in that pool of funds to allocate according to where those students come back to. Because I think one of the questions that I believe I saw in the survey is, are you coming back to the same address? Are you coming back to a different address?
Or do you not know? Right.
You do not know. You're coming back, but you actually don't know what address you're coming back to because, we are assuming that the base budget is assuming that we are back in person as a you know, school, everybody's in class in
Full-time.
person, and we're back to our 21 students per classroom average. The reserve also then can stand for if we have hybrid or we have a remote learning academy, like we have funds and resources to be able to pivot into a different model as well, separate then. And we can also think about hybrid differently to begin with as well as we plan into this FY22 budget. Because we now know how many students can fit in our classroom 6 feet distance, or if the distance is lessened to 3 feet, you know, we know how many we can put in a section for hybrid and not have 7 kids in class, 6 kids in a class in a day, but split those differently. Those planning and those decisions can be done differently. And
Can we pause 1 second, Mary Ellen? I would love, if it's okay with you, to hear from the members of advisory that are here about sort of their take on this approach. Because I think even when we discussed this at school committee last week, as you said, there was some questions about, and I know I had questions and there were other questions about this approach to budgeting. And I'm curious what, I see Cliff and Janet, I think you're the only two here right now, but what you think about this approach to budgeting for next year.
I guess I'll go first because Janet, I think you just came on. Is that correct?
No, Janet was here.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
My video sometimes flakes out. Go ahead, Cliff, and I have a question or a comment after you.
Well, I think it's continues to be very challenging for you, for all of you, and for all of us, of course. So it's one thing to have a base budget. I guess the question I would have is what kind of scenarios are going to be developed off of that base budget? Because you don't want to, I think we want to be going into town meeting with something that gives people a sense of what might happen. Because if by the end of the summer, you're budgeting without 900, and then you come up with a scenario with adding back 400, and then at the end of the summer, everyone's back. That's going to be a problem. And so I do think that how this gets discussed and presented is a challenge. But I think that has to be scenario analysis.
Janet?
Yeah, I would agree with Cliff on the scenarios. Overall, I think that the approach Mary Ellen is taking is the only logical one as someone who does budgets, starting with the known, but given that there's a whole bunch of unknown, if you can put funds aside and then as you get more information, you're building those, or maybe build the budget based on who's here now, and then build the other end of the scenario being the 900 come back, just so you know, once I've got my per pupil expenditures, how much, if 900 more came times that amount, what would that be? So you know what the ultimate amount is.
I mean, if
somewhere in there, factor in what it means if everybody's in class versus hybrid versus God knows what else we could come up with. I don't envy your position at all, but I think the general approach, as I understand it, that you've outlined makes sense.
I think if you start off with a budget approach of we're going to be back in the buildings with 900 fewer people, you're going to be budgeting for probably significantly lower overall expenses than you actually had this year. And of course, the risk in doing that is that money gets allocated by town meeting. And then we're in a situation at the end of the summer where you need more money. I think that's a real issue. On the other hand, you're gonna have people also saying, well, if you don't know who's gonna come back, we don't necessarily want to sequester this money for the schools, because if we do that, you're gonna spend it anyway.
The survey that we were talking about, which came up last week at school committee, was exactly to hopefully get better information about, of that 900, how many of them will be back in the fall or intend to be back or think that they will be back, to to be hopefully like narrow that scope, that delta of and also in addition to the as we talked about the grades 1 through 12, there was the kindergarten was down to about, was it 450 this year, and so it's about 150 down, and to about 100 families I think redshirted their kids or sent them to private kindergarten. And so to find out if those families are going to be coming back for first grade or for kindergarten, because we might find that 900 actually is low because there's a larger kindergarten class than
So
anyone
Cliff,
could have predicted, right?
yeah, to add to that, Mariah, to Cliff, is that the kindergarten number we're using is the projected kindergarten from the Cropper McGivens. And then Mariah's comment reminds me that we should probably look at the first grade numbers and really look at maybe bumping first grade, the first grade numbers to the same, because we are going to have probably kids coming in at those two intervals differently, migrating in at a much different rate than we've had. So, but we're also, the reason why we would have this other reserve in our budget, is because we also don't know whether we'll need an RLA again. And so that also changes the calculus and calculation. So not only do we need funds for hybrid and have a scenario for hybrid, we also need a scenario for the RLA. And I think the question, Cliff, is where or how does the town want to deal with us having a multi-million-dollar reserve in the school budget that's not tied to a building? Because we don't, I'm advocating anyway, is to not tie it to a building until we know where those students are, so we can make sure that those resources follow those students, particularly special ed, EL, and the supports need to follow students. So then there's potentially a third reserve that needs to be out there, which is if potentially if all 900 or more come back. But that I don't have. I'm going to go live on an island if I guess that number right, because I will never be that lucky again.
So
So
let me
Mary
just,
Ellen, I was assuming that some of these answers would be in before May, which I thought this was a starting point as you work through the budget until you got to a final budget in May. Depending on how it goes, I mean, there's the option of what we did this year and then a final budget in November. I'm not sure what town meeting would say to that. They seem to want to snap up any funds that are not locked down. So I don't know how soon you expect to start getting some answers, because I wasn't envisioning you wouldn't have them in May.
We're not going to, I'm not sure when we're going to have them. I also am not sure, because I haven't previewed any of the town school partnership money. Is what's the town, how much is there, how much will there be? So some of these, while my projections maybe well exceed the town's revenue stream and ability and money coming from federal or state sources. So that's the other confining factor.
I was just going to actually make that point, because the last information that we all have from the town school partnership was a potential drop of, was it $10 million?
But it was 8 and change.
It's 8 and
Yeah,
change.
something like that.
It was not insubstantial. So we actually should get an update on that, all of us. I think that having reserves in the school system's accounts, it goes back to the days of Bill and Peter, and we kind of like went the other direction. I think to the extent that that's something that needs to be done because of the uncertainty, the question's really going to be, under what circumstances does that money really get released? And if it's not needed because you know, we're back in the buildings and those 900 don't show up, okay, I don't think that's going to happen, but if it did, then people aren't going to want that money to stay in the school budget. So there really has to be kind of conditions of appropriation, if you will. And I can't really think of what those would be at this point.
Conversely, Cliff, can I say one thing about that and then go to you, Janet, which was what I get afraid of is we are $8 million or $10 million in the hole, and the school reserve fund looks like an easy place to pluck from when that money. And so I guess my concern is that the wording of that, or the framing of that fund, is not looked at as a nice to have. At least we don't know if it's probably a need to have, but it can't be scraped before we know, right? That's what I worry about, is going into Maytown meeting and we're trying to close the gap and it goes away when it really isn't like a nice to have.
Well, there's no way you guys are going to know what you need by May.
Exactly.
And that message really has to start filtering out.
Say that again. It has to start what?
It has to start filtering out now.
Yeah.
You need to start preparing people for that.
But I was just going to say, I'm not sure that town meeting has the authority to put conditions of appropriation on money that's been allocated to the schools, because we've always been told once it's theirs, which is why I was thinking of reserves sort of in the town side as we did this year, not putting things in a specific line. I don't know how politically feasible that is, but there certainly has to be a lot of messaging about the level of uncertainty and the ways we're trying to guard against it.
Well, I guess even I understand what you're saying, Janet, and of course that's correct. But then I suppose it comes down to whether or not there's an ability to work with the school committee, if you will, to come up with appropriate conditions of appropriation, with an understanding that if that money isn't needed, that it's not going to be used, and that it's either going to get carried over or go to free cash and get allocated a different way next year. It needs to be negotiated and discussed. No, we're not going to solve it today.
So, Cliff, I agree we need to be fiscally responsible, and I think we are fiscally responsible, but even more so this coming year from what you're saying. The piece that I think we're going to run into trouble with is August, because that's when we'll know how many foreign students are coming in, how many English learners are coming in. And we're down about 300 this year, and that can make a huge difference in terms of our being able to provide education that we have to do.
Right. Well, I think.
And August is not a good time because there's no town meeting. There's no,
And it's right before school starts. I mean, at that point, like the die is almost
and
cast.
you have to hire immediately.
Yeah.
Understood. I think,
by November we'll know.
There are a lot of things that are going to go into trying to project for that. It's going to be what's going to happen at the federal level in terms of policy and travel policy, and how people around the world are inoculated or not.
Or how safe people around the world feel in the United States.
Exactly. I am not suggesting that there are answers or really easy answers. All I'm suggesting is that to the extent that money is going to be sequestered, that people have to feel that it's going to be used only if it's needed. That's all I'm really saying.
I agree.
And Cliff, to that point, I'm trying to prepare the school department in presenting that reserve with, we're reserving X amount for X number of teachers, paras, per pupil materials and things, so that there's some math to it so people can understand. So it's not just $5 million or $8 million. It's actually, here's the budget. This is how we calculated this, so that there's some meat and beef behind it. Because I appreciate people be like, well, that's a big number. Why do you need that much? And
yeah, it's kind of like the formula that's supposed to exist in the town school partnership for student growth, right?
Yeah, I did talk to Melissa about that though. So we're having conversations.
Is there a way to tie dollars to groups of bodies? Like, you don't expect it's going to be the whole 900 either coming or staying out. For every X number of additional students, these are the calculations behind the money that we need, so people can at least see a path.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
And then
Because
Well,
every
I think
single
the other,
year you have a variation from whatever you projected.
Right.
And we
The oth-
went through years where that variation was hugely over, but you managed to live within the, because we have no choice but to live within the dollars we have.
and I think there's a piece, Janet, also that has to be answered in the budget, which is when you look at our section counts and how we've divided up our current students back in, assuming they're all back in the buildings, to get to that average of 2021, how many students are in a classroom that it flips to a new section? So when you hit, 21, we're going to go to a new section. So that means these costs, like right off the bat, to open a new section, for example. I think to your point, that's one of the other pieces we're going to have in there as well, because we do have some schools where right now the incoming 8th grade, for example, is very comfortable at a 21. Classrooms are big, and but if you get to 23, we're going to want to split that classroom. But if you take it and make it divide by the number of sections that school usually has, it would be 17. And so, that's a teacher. And when we're mining for dollars, potentially, it's hard. And we don't necessarily know if kids are coming back in that grade level at that school. So those are the nuances of the budget and the reserve that are going to have probably a lot of conversations. And everybody's going to want to say, well, we're getting people back, we need to budget at 17. Well, that's a $90,000 to $100,000 proposition to open up a new classroom. Is okay. Do we have that $100,000 right now, or do we want to hold that $100,000 until we know we actually need it and where we need it? Those are going to be really hard questions and are new questions for budget managers to contend with.
Ellen, go ahead, and then I want to make another comment, and then we should probably,
Susan
we
was
have some other
before
business.
me.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't want to, did you want to say something,
Yeah, I
Susan?
was just gonna, I think one way to do this that's sort of is to pick a baseline number, whatever it is that we pick, and be clear on what that is. Have an enrollment reserve that is specifically for enrollment increases, for however we want to calculate it, full, either the full cost per student or however you want to do it, but some amount that's an enrollment reserve. So that would be reserve 1. Reserve 2 would be a remote learning reserve, either RLA or whatever it is. It's going to be something different by then, but a remote learning reserve. A third one would be a COVID reserve, which is specifically around public health or safety, whatever, God only knows what it's going to be. I mean, this year, I'm assuming, Mariella, that the $250,000 for teacher testing is in for next year, but I don't know that that's true for the last half of this year, but I don't know that that's true. So whatever, there's going to be COVID costs that show up, which we may or may not plan for. And then there's a special ed contingency. So I think if we can create specific, like big enough buckets that they're flexible, but at least they're understandable to, I see Janet nodding, like you can explain what this is. I think we don't want 500 of them, but if we have 4 or 5, that would help a lot. And then we say, okay, well, to do surveillance testing of teachers once a week for 10 weeks is $250,000. So that's where that money is going. And you could just sort of be clear about it. So I don't, it's not easy to do, but it's certainly doable, I guess.
So to make matters even more complicated, we were talking about at government relations, the issue of the state funding. And it's usually based on the October 1st numbers, which would be 600 kids less, which translates into how much less per student? Mary Ellen?
It's probably 18 grand a piece.
Okay, somebody else do the math.
I don't know. I've heard right now that
per student
Chapter 70 is being level funded.
Okay,
That's what I've heard so far.
What we are going to do at government relations is push to be held harmless, that they assume the same number that we had in 2019 for our 2020, for our FY22 budget. That's what we're going to push with our legislators. And I think every community who is also suffering similar to us losses, probably were more than some, but more than a lot. But every community would want that. So the legislature may be willing to go along with it. But that's another piece of the puzzle.
The other piece I wanted to say that we talked about at school committee the other day was the idea of doing a more substantive summer program, and to what extent we need to build in funds for enhanced literacy and such over the summer, which typically extended school year starts just after the fiscal year begins. It's early July to early August. And so again, that might be something where, I don't know how that gets presented yet, but that's something to think about. You know, is that in the base budget or not? And I
So
think it probably should be, right? But
our current, we've just moved our summer discovery and attached to the Title I grant for the summer. So for next summer, to make sure we have those funds available for next summer. We've been moving to that model for the last couple of years. Because those funds need to be spent by the end of August. So whatever is left in that Title I grant for the FY21 or the 21 Title I grant, all of that can be used for next summer. So, but that doesn't mean that we still shouldn't have some in the FY22 operating budget to do additional supports. And I know that Mindy Paolo for ELE has a summer program she's been working on, and Keith Lazama also has been working and coordinating with Mindy on a summer program as well, but out of both of their grants, and improving those and students served there. But it's a good question. We should still continue to ask it and make sure that we know exactly what's happening. And funds are
well,
there.
and that it's going, it might be a larger program than in previous years. So, right. Okay.
Yeah.
I think any last comments on this? Because I think we need to vote the gifts. And then
the only last comment I would make is, Mary Ellen, like, this is a lot of work, and I know that I think you're still down people in your department, but can you just give us an update on your capacity to deliver this and what you need? I mean, I had to, in my last act as finance chair, I had indicated to Jim that I thought he needed to hire at least 2 FTEs for the next 3 months to actually figure out what we are spending money on right now in our budget. Because we need information to be able to make decisions and to be able to advocate for more money. Like, we can't not have an FY21 budget. We have to give people what we promised them in May. So you need additional resources. And so I think it would just be helpful for all of us to understand what you are working with right now and what you need to be able to deliver. Like, start with the assumption that if you had to actually deliver everything we just talked about, like, what is it that you would need in your department to help you? I said at least 2, potentially 3 people, but it's really your thing, and I think we have to find money for that also. I mean, because otherwise we can't do anything else.
Yeah. So in delivering the FY21 budget document, and then all the different iterations for 22, you know, I know that I need an experienced full-time mini-me, literally. So I have used Ruth Burdell to get the end of year report done. She's just about finished with that. She's been working with Donna because the grants and revolving funds have had some cumulative decades old issues. You'll hear about one shortly. And so she should be done. Is she going to be done with that by December?
Which thing, the year?
The revolving funding grants?
I'd probably say into January.
Okay, so if she's not, because she's just part-time, about 10 to 15 hours, is I probably need somebody 30 hours who's a retired, somebody like Ruth Burdell who knows and understands their way around munis and around a budget. It's not something I can hire off the street for. And that has some acumen it's really with munis and spreadsheets. So That's one option. The other option I've also presented is pulling me off of sort of all the other duties I have and having me 100% in finance, because I'm not 100% in finance. And that would mean me not attending capital meetings, building meetings, not supervising Matt on a day-to-day basis, not or food service or transportation, that sort of all gets carved off. And you know, I've had some conversations with people about the deputy superintendent position really being a two-person job with the district of the size that we are and the number of buildings we have. And is it a point at which you make a decision about having a CFO, school business administrator that reports to the school committee, and a chief operating officer type that does everything else in the administration? So, you know, because we're lean, very lean for a district our size. So yeah, I mean, I think Jim and I've had a conversation and sort of outlining and talking a little bit more about what the budget development needs are and how complicated it is and how big we are. You know, I am definitely going to need Ruth's hands freed up. She's pretty fast and a whiz at and extracting data. So along with myself, but I can't wait till January for that. So that's sort of off the top of my head kind of thoughts.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciate the CFO, COO split, and that's a great conversation to have for FY22, but I'm literally talking about getting us through the next like 3-4 months. And so I'm happy to advocate, and Suzanne and David, you guys have to figure this out more than we do, but like we have to figure out how to get the capacity we need to deliver the documents. I mean, we didn't deliver it for November. We didn't deliver it for May, June. People understood. We didn't deliver it for November. We have to be able to deliver these documents, or else no one's going to give us any more money. I wouldn't ask for any more money because we can't, you know. So I really can't urge strongly enough to like get a 30-hour-a-week person in and probably a budget analyst underneath them to be able to actually do this work, and or someone who can, you know, work with Matt. And Matt is also doing 2.5 jobs. As far as I can tell. So I just think that we really have to take a hard look at that, like now, not for next year and all the big decisions that have to get made, but like literally now. So that's my advocacy on that, because there's a lot that we have to deliver.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, why don't we go ahead and look at the gifts. So there were the to Susan and David, you have that memo, right? The 2 gifts. Do we have a motion for gift acceptance? Thank you, Susan. Do we have a second? David looks like he's on the phone. Are you on the phone, David?
I'm not sure he can hear.
I'm not sure either. Is he there?
David,
Hi,
can you
David.
hear us?
I just want to say, email Janine. Thank you so much. I'm so deeply touched.
Just vote yes. David, vote yes.
Sorry, I have another call going on. Oh, sorry,
It's
what's
okay.
The question is just approving the gift acceptance,
People
yes?
are giving us money. Vote yes.
I approve.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Susan, do you vote yes?
Yes.
Okay. And I vote yes as well. So that's done. Robin, is there anything else we need to do in public session other than the motion to go into executive session?
Well, the 1217 docket has second reading, possible vote on the calendar and the guidelines. Are you all set with those?
Oh, are we actually, I only saw that it said they were in there. I didn't know that they were supposed to do something other than discuss them, which we really didn't. I don't think we can talk about those for now. I mean, I think we did talk about them in that we said we need a lot more information and it's going to be really hard to adhere to them as they are proposed. So that's as far as I think we're going to get of a reading for now. So I think we're going to, anything else or beyond that, Robin, or can we do our part of going into executive session?
I think that was the only other item.
Okay. So,
All right, just the only other thing, I don't know if it's new business or what, but just the testing number, I do want people to understand what those numbers are because they're going to hit us in the next 6 months of this year. It's about 250,000 to 300,000 to do surveillance testing for teachers, and a little bit and a bit more to do it for students. So we're going to get a recommendation from the superintendent and the town administrator, but I just want people to have a sense of what that is looking like.
and that's going to be a reserve fund transfer request?
Well, we have to figure out exactly, that's what I was asking. It has to figure out with all the rest of these things in the mix.
Okay.
The puts and calls, which is why we need real financial, depth underneath Mary Ellen to help her do this, because that, if we don't have that financial analysis, we're going to be making bad decisions. So it will pay for itself. So that's just so people have a ballpark in their head. That's what it's looking like.
Thank you. I don't know the language for going into executive session. And I don't know, sorry about that. I should have had this, but I didn't know exactly. Oh, it's written right here. Okay. So I just read what's written on the agenda, right?
Right, it's just
Okay.
right there. Yep.
So motion to meet in executive session pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A for the following purposes. Purpose 2, to conduct a strategy session in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, non-aligned personnel. Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with AFSCME, Brookline Educational Secretaries Association, if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body and the chair so declares. And purpose 7, to review and approve executive session minutes from the following meeting, June 23rd, 2020. Do I have a second? Thank you, Susan. David? I'm going to put up your hand if you can say yes. I don't think he hears me. Susan, do you vote yes?
Yes.
Okay, I vote yes. So maybe we don't even.
Yes.
Okay.
Executive session, yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, sorry, Cliff, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to say goodbye.
Bye, Cliff.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Mariah,
And yeah,
after the vote, if in general, if you can just announce that you won't be going back into open session.
and we won't be going back into executive session.